Okay. So before dealing with the example, HTML example, and then CSS, just other announcements. I mean, it's always there on the website, but I'd like to point out things also during the lectures, right? So that's the updated schedule. So tomorrow there's the lab, as I said, about security. We will have a lecture on Thursday. There will be lab on Friday. I think still this week. I asked the offices if they can move the lab on Tuesday. I didn't get a reply yet, so since Tuesday is tomorrow, probably this week will be still Friday. I try to press them. So, that's why you see to be confirmed here. Hopefully, maybe they move it to Tuesday. And also note that next week on Monday, so it means in this room, we will have a lab instead of a lecture, okay? So it means that we will do as we do in the room for the lab, okay? You can here with your laptop, and basically you go on with the lab. And in practice, the topic of the lab will be HTML and CSS, so what we are going to see today, okay? Part of that is already seen, and because we need to experiment with what we present. So I mean, it's always a bit difficult to match lectures and practical exercise. Sometimes there's more theory, and so we can move on with the theory as in the beginning of the course, and sometimes we need to experiment a little bit with the content and what we explain. So I think we will do it maybe once more after later in the semester. Okay, I'm not sure. I need to check the schedule and see what happens. And you never know what's going to happen. So just to warn you that next Monday is lab. I mean, for you it doesn't change that much. I mean, you come here as usual. Just remember to bring your laptop to experiment for the lab, and there will be me, hopefully, yes, and the student that helps us during the labs. And since the room is big, I mean, you can even stay 3 hours. I mean, there's no problem. This room is big, okay? And the number of people attending the lab is about 50, 60. So, I mean, there's plenty of space for everybody. Okay, so that's all about announcements. And so we can move on, right? We said we would like to experiment a little bit with the HTML. So before we move on, let's see the example I prepared. So there is an example, right? Yes, here, example. So a small exercise, really basic stuff. I mean, create a prototype of the user interface of the question and answer website. So the example that we will carry on during the whole course using HTML and CSS. Let's forget for CSS about the CSS now, and we will do it later. We create a page showing all the answers to the questions selected. Well, in the previous page, actually, there's no page, sorry. But anyway, for the question shown here, okay. The page should display information about question, present table containing all the given answer. An example is given here just for convenience, okay. I mean, in the text of the exam, there will be no example shown, and you need to design your user interface. Just use a reasonable approach. I mean, you navigate on a lot of websites, try to make something simple, but I mean, in line with what you see around, okay? So, I mean, if you need to put a menu, just don't put it into the middle of the page, okay, on the side or on the top or whatever, and just be inspired by the websites that you typically use, okay? Also think that when you develop for somebody like your customers, typically they have no idea about the user interface and so on. So they tell you, I want a website that does this. Okay, and you need to come up with the user interface. Okay, so here to simplify things and to show you more or less what we expect, there's a little drawing, okay? So in this exercise, the web page must be static, so there's no interactive stuff, and that's for later in the course, and the data will be hard-coded, so there's nothing loaded and so on, okay? So just we type text, and the Bootstrap framework is for later for the CSS. So let's try to make a first sketch of this stuff, okay? Actually, I already prepared it, and because, I mean, we don't have that much time in the class, okay, to code. And you see, it's an HTML5, doc type HTML, that's HTML, a tag, and you see it has two children tags, head and body. Head is very simple title, and later on we will load stuff here like the CSS, etc. So that's the metadata, and the body contains the content of the page. So the text, other text and so on. But you see H1, that's the header level 1, so the top level header. And we chose, I mean, to implement it this way. Okay, we could write the question and then maybe H2 or a paragraph with the text of the question. That's, again, just a possible solution. Okay. And then just to experiment a little bit with the table. There's a table where you have table rows and table headers and table data. Okay, so 5 columns, that's fine. Okay, so how do we see how it works? I mean, we just open the file with the browser. Okay, so yes, the file is here, page v1, and open with the browser. That's Firefox. Okay. So you see here file, unfortunately it's very small, but I mean, it's not loading from the network, it's just loading a file from the disk, okay? And that's the appearance. Really bad, right? But the content is there, okay? And if you inspect, I invite you to always have the inspector open. I will always have the inspector open at the exam, because I need to understand what's happening in your application. I'm basically debugging your application. Hopefully everything works and it's fine. And you see the inspector here shows the HTML, the same HTML that we wrote in Visual Studio Code. And you see you touch elements and you see them highlighted, in the browser window, okay? I mean, the websites can be quite complex. If we do this on the Polito website, it's very complex, right? But on easy websites, this works pretty well. Okay, you can even do the opposite. That's here. That's this button. You go to a place. Okay, so you move here, and you see the corresponding item in the HTML highlighted by the browser. Okay, so it's very useful for debugging. And you see that because depending on where you touch, can be the whole table, just a row, hopefully. Yeah, the row. I'm not sure I can select the row anyway. No, it doesn't matter. And you see this is the default rendering of the HTML with the style predefined in the browser that nobody uses. Okay, so this ugly font, I would say, etc. Okay, the table doesn't show the lines, so the horizontal vertical lines. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, we know that logically it's a table, okay, because we define the table in the HTML. Fine. So if we want to change something, I mean, no problem. I mean, we are in 2025, right? So let's save it. And you see, still 2024, you just reload the file, okay? And you see, it's just a browser, and it loads the content. It parses the content, as we said. It creates its own representation in the memory, and it displays that content. And until something changes, that is what is displayed. Okay? Either we load a new content, so a new document, and so everything starts from the beginning again, or there will be like the JavaScript or our code that modifies a part of the document, and so the browser will update what is shown. Okay, but this is for later, next week. No, Thursday, sorry. Okay, so really basic stuff, right? So so you see that the Visual Studio Code helps you to identify the open and closed tags and all this stuff. Really, I mean, really good environment, I would say. Okay, so that's a basic document, and as you saw, it's not that difficult to change the content and to come up with something interesting. So let's come to something that is more useful in the long term, at least. So how do we change the appearance? And by appearance, we don't just say, well, let's change the color of the text and this kind of stuff, really basic stuff, but also how to organize the application and I mean the content that is shown in the browser in the most efficient way. So how to create a style for our application, and so that we just say, well, this is an element that belongs to this style, and it automatically gets formatted in the sense of rendered correctly as the appearance, for the appearance, and it's also is positioned correctly in the page. Okay, here nothing was difficult because we had the header and the table, and having the header before the table, that was fine. Okay, but if we have a list and a menu and so on, things can start to be more difficult. Okay, so how do we achieve this? Well, we need this CSS, and that's last topic for today, but it will take the whole lecture. So, cascading style sheets. So that's the outline, but I mean, we don't have so much time, so we run a little bit. There have been 3 versions until now of the CSS. We are at CSS 3, well, almost 4. But CSS 3 is most important for us because it had this modular approach. Okay, it's made of different parts. So in short, you see there are elements, parts of the standard that deal with different types of content. Okay, that also add new functionalities like layouting functionalities and so on. We will review what is mostly used today. Okay, we don't really care, I say, about the standard version and stuff like that. Okay. So, first of all, CSS syntax. Well, CSS is based on rules, and they are written as text again. So they are really easy to write and easy to read. At least read. I mean, interpreting them is more difficult. A rule is a statement about one stylistic aspect of one or more HTML elements, and is composed by a selector plus a declaration or a set of declarations. So this selector says to which element the rule is applied, and this declaration says what to do. Like here it's color blue and font size 12 pixels, I think, points, I don't remember. Okay, surrounded by these curly brackets. So it's pretty easy. I mean, just a syntax that we need to learn. So, selector or group of selectors separated by the comma, like header, that's the name of a tag. P.intro we will say later what's the meaning, but P is the paragraph, it's another HTML element. So to both header and P, apply this rule: background color red, border radius 3 pixels. Okay. And this applies to the HTML document. We need to say at a certain point to apply this rule. So we are at the point here of the HTML where we have this DOM, right? That's the parsing of the content of the HTML content. But we have still no no rules, right? No way of writing the rules that we saw before. Well, let's say that we are able to apply a rule at a certain point in this tree, like to the body, okay? And like body, see, the body has color green, is green, okay? As default color. Okay, what we need to know, that's also why it's called cascading style sheet, is that a rule that is applied to a certain point in the tree is inherited by all the elements below in the tree. So I apply something at the body level, remember head and body level, it means at the root of the content. So it will cascade, so it means it will apply to all the elements below the body, so basically to the whole page. Okay, so everything will be by default green because I specified green here at this point. If I specify something else for other HTML elements, like H1, the innermost rule will apply. So the rule which is lower in the tree will apply if it goes into conflict with the previous rules. Okay, so basically you have a default, and from a certain point you can change the default down the tree. Okay, like here red, for instance, for HY. Okay, how do I apply properties? Well, there are plenty of properties. There are more than 200 CSS properties in the recent CSS version. And if you go to the specifications, everyone is specified with its name and the possible values, etc. Some properties will take numbers, measurements, percentage, or maybe colors as before, enumerated options like was display block inline, etc. And it depends on the type of property, but everything is specified in the CSS standard. Also, if this is inherited to children elements, not all properties are inherited. Most of them are, like the colors, for instance. But if you have an image, you don't want to inherit the image, the background image, because otherwise every piece, every element has its own piece of image. So, I mean, it's just a technicality. But so the point is that there are a set of rules, possible values. You just have to use them. Okay. There are plenty of properties for basically everything you can imagine. CSS is quite complete nowadays. Okay, so of course you saw color properties, also border properties, text properties, the size of the text, font properties. You want to change the font, that ugly font that you saw before, background properties, borders like for tables and stuff like that, but not just tables. List for the list and so on. Animation, you can also animate some elements, say, you know, there are transitions or stuff like that. I mean, there's really a lot of properties that you can set with CSS. We will review basic things now, just to let you start using the CSS. Okay? Well, sometimes we need to specify measures, units in CSS. We already saw the px, okay, that was pixel, okay. That was pixel, right? Or pt, I don't remember. Yeah, px, yes. So there was pixels, okay. Most common fixed unit is the pixel, the pixel, the dot of the screen. Okay, and this belongs to the absolute type of units. Okay, because you know, they are not relative. If you change the size of the window, the pixel stays the same. Okay, if the screen size changes, because one client is a desktop, one is a laptop, and the other is a mobile phone, the pixel is still a pixel. Okay. So sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. It depends on what you need to specify. Okay. And so it's not really well suited when you need to change the size of the window, and you need to handle different sizes of the window of the browser. Okay. And so basically there are quite a number of different types of units defined in CSS, but again, the most useful ones are probably the percentage. Percentage is easy to understand. I mean, you have a certain amount of space and you want to divide according to 100%. M is relative to the font size of the element. Sometimes it's useful because you don't know the font size of the element, okay? And you say, well, it should be more or less the same size of the basic size of a letter that is written inside the element, okay? And you don't care about how many pixels and stuff like that. But there is also rem, that is the one that we encourage to use in case you need to use it, okay? Because it's relative to font size of the root element of the HTML page, okay? So it basically means that you can enlarge or reduce the size of the content of the page and everything adapts automatically, okay? So it's very convenient, like, here I always do this kind of things, right? So it's very convenient if everything works correctly when you resize the content of the page. Okay. So in short, let's say when we have to specify size, probably rem is a good choice unless you have a relative measure to express to the parent, okay, or the container element, so you have a certain amount of space and you need to divide it. Okay. A few words about the selectors. You remember the first part of the rule, right? This part, or this one, the selector. We saw very simple selectors, H1, P, and so on. But selectors can be quite different, okay? Of course, we have the element selector, that's the name of the HTML tag. So all the names that we saw before during the previous lecture. The body, H1, P, paragraph, table, etc. All the names. But you can also have class selectors, ID selector, attribute selector, pseudo selectors. Okay? Now we will see what they are. Oops. Element selector, that's easy, right? Okay. Class selector, that's more interesting, and we already saw this class attribute attached to the HTML element, right? So this class attribute that I told you can be used for any element in HTML. It's just a string as a value, can have multiple words, okay? But let's say it has a single string. The single string is decided by the designer of the web page, okay? And if this string matches the string that you use here as a selector of the CSS rule, and you put the dot before, the dot means what follows. You need to be searched as a value of a class of the elements in the HTML document, okay? So basically, I can create actually a style. This is a style. There's a certain name that me as a developer decide. I decide the name, and it will be applied to all elements where I put class equal to this name in the HTML. Okay? So like let's say blue text, and these elements will be blue, and the other ones will be not, or actually I don't know. That will have the color that is the default color that is inherited from the body. If I didn't specify enough, if I didn't specify anything, probably the browser has black color, but I don't know. Okay. Let's try something. Otherwise it becomes really boring, right? I think yes. Let me just copy this. This one here. Oops. Week 5. No, HTML. Paste. Okay, So it's just the same document as before, but the difference is that we import in some ways the style, okay, that is written externally. In this style CSS file, we need to say to the HTML document to use this style, and this style CSS has to be written and put in the same place. So let me put it here, just to show you. It's just you know, a simple text file. Okay, it's called .css, but it's a text file. So H1 selector of type element. Okay, so all H1s that are present in the document will have background color light green. Okay, this stuff is just nice stuff from Visual Studio Code. Okay, okay, background color is so nice that it goes into the CSS specification, tells us what it is, etc. Okay, but let's save it and let's load again the document version 2. Okay, here, and so we experiment. You see that the H1 has background color green. Okay, this style applies to all H1. I have just one H1 in the browser, in the HTML document, so shown in the browser. And by the way, you see that the inspector also shows you the styles, right, here on the right. You can even disable or enable them. You can even play. Okay, you can even change the color. I think red, right? It shows you the changes in real time. It's really useful for debugging stuff. Okay, but for our purposes at the moment it's just for debugging what's happening. Okay, and the table you see has nothing here because there's no selector that applies to the table. Okay, we could make, let's say, H1 table. Right, save. Let me reload. You see also the table is green now. Okay, or we can make, as we saw before, green, well, let's say yellow. Okay, background color yellow. Background color is so nice because you can experiment easily, right, without destroying everything. I mean, still seeing what you have on the page, right? And okay, this is a dot selector, right? So it's a class selector. So it doesn't work until I specify a class somewhere. Okay, so let me specify the class here. Table class. What did I? Yellow. Not that much fancy. Yellow. Okay. Yellow. Okay. You see that's a table class yellow, and you get this yellow. Okay. But this time it's not just the table. I mean, it's the table in this case because we have a class yellow. Okay. But we can have something else at the end, right? So say P, yes, class yellow, example, footer. No, let me, this is the end of page. Okay, save, load again. Okay, so the same rule applies to different elements because they have the same class. Okay, so that's the powerfulness of CSS, right? And you have different types of selectors. So this one is the one that is more like the style, right? The style sheet, because there are classes of styles. But you can also have the ID selector. We say that you can mark an element with an ID, a specific ID unique to that element, and you can use it with the hash symbol. Okay? The difference is this style typically applies only to one element because you only have one ID with that specific value. Okay? But sometimes it's useful, like error message, warning, whatever. Typically you only have one on the page, in the page. Okay? You can also use class for achieving the same purpose. Okay? Again, this is a philosophical way of interpreting things. It's more about, you think it's unique, okay, use an ID. You think it's something that could be applied even later for something else, it's more like a style, use class, okay? And that's, let's say, the original CSS, the older CSS. But nowadays, CSS also supports more syntaxes to select, to be more flexible in selecting the elements to which the styles needs to be applied. Like, you see this attribute. So we open the square bracket, we put the name of the attribute, okay? And we can select all the elements that have that attribute and so on, okay? It's not helpful that I go here and show you all the cases, also because at the end we will conclude saying, it's a kind of a spoiler, but conclude saying, well, CSS is really difficult to manage. So let's try to use a sort of library. It will be a framework, okay, where I have some nice predefined defaults. And in case we need to change something, but more or less, for us, it's enough to have an ID or a class. And we will apply selectively to some places, and that's all, more or less, okay? So that's good for knowledge, the principle and so on, but I mean, we are not going to use them so much. We will see them quickly because we need to know they exist, but at a certain point when we understand the general concept, more or less that's enough for us. There are pseudo class selectors, okay, used to style an element based on something other than the structure of the document. The classical case is the link. The link has already been clicked. You typically show it with a different color. You pass with the mouse over the link. You would like to highlight it, the fact it's a link, and so on. So these are statuses which are not related to the document structure, but to something that happened, okay? And so that's why they are called the pseudo class selectors. And you see, these names are predefined in the standard again. So you see the column, link, visited, hover, active, focus, etc. There are a number of them, okay? And I would leave this as an exercise to you in case you would like to experiment, okay? Have an A tag and just change, the over. You pass with the mouse and it changes color, okay? Very easy. And also nice from the point of view of the usage of the, for the user interface. I mean, selectors can be combined. We already saw the comma, right? So basically, we want to apply the same rule to two selectors, just separate with the comma, okay? Be careful that the space is not a comma. It's S2, so the second one needs to be nested within the S1, okay? It's not at the same level or somewhere in the document. Or where the greatest sign directs children and so on, okay? Again, it's probably, for us, that's probably enough to have the comma. Sometimes we need to apply the same thing in two places, and of course, we don't want to rewrite the same rule twice, okay? So that's a summary. I mean, again, most of these slides are just for reference. We will focus on important things, like some properties. There are properties of CSS, which are really important, and we need to know them. Also because they are useful in an indirect way later, also with the library and the framework. So that's a display property that we already saw before. It doesn't affect the appearance in terms of color, shape, and stuff like that, but it affects the positioning. Okay, so this property allows to control how the element is visualized, so where it is put in the page. Every HTML element has a default value for this property, and we already saw elements which are by default inline, the A tag, the what was it, the span, and so on. Okay, the list item, for instance. Okay, no, sorry, the list item is typically block, and this is made inline. And vice versa, there are elements which are by default block, like the paragraph, like the table. Okay, you don't typically have a table inline. I mean, it's not a part of text, and so on. Okay, we can change this display property of the HTML tag and say it's inline instead of block, and vice versa. And basically, we change how the browser would arrange the element in the page. Okay, if it's a block, it makes a block, and then new line, another block, and so on. If it's inline, it goes on the same line, one element after the other, and wraps at the end of the line in case it's needed. Okay, and sometimes, for instance, let's say this is the list element. To make an horizontal list instead of a vertical list, you need to change this property. Otherwise, lists are always vertical for the browser. Okay, because they are block elements. And this is just an example, okay, of what can be done with CSS. I don't expect you to be able to use CSS in full details at the end of the course. I'm not able to use it either, because, I mean, a whole course could be done about CSS. You saw the 200 properties, and especially about positioning. That's the difficult part. I mean, coloring stuff, not that difficult. Okay. You can hide elements on the page, even if they are still there in the HTML. You just don't show them. Okay. And there are two different ways of hiding them. There is a property, display, that if you set to none, makes the element disappear as if the element is not there. So it's kind of ignored in the HTML. It's still there, it's in the DOM, in the representation of the HTML in the memory of the browser, but it's not rendered, it's not put into the page. Hidden, again, it's not shown, but it affects the layout. So it's not like it's not there. It's there, but it's simply not shown. Okay, it's hidden. You need to, be careful and read very carefully the CSS specifications when you are in doubt and you need to manipulate all these properties. Okay, this is just an example. Oops, 6. Okay, pseudo class selectors we saw before. There are many. Again, I just highlighted a couple of them just to tell you, these are probably the most used ones in case you need to use them. Okay, hover, the mouse is over, not just for the links, they work for everything that supports, the hover event. Invalid, sometimes it's useful because in forms, elements can be invalid, like you typed something wrong. I mean, you expected a number in a string and stuff like that. Okay, and it could be useful to format the appearance of these elements. Okay, I mean, just an example of something that could be useful. But then I mean, you need to wait the end of the course to decide if it's really useful or not, because it might be already solved by some other libraries, packages of stuff, or code that has already been written by others. Okay? Oops, sorry. So cascading. Why cascading? We already saw the fact that properties are inherited, but also because a document can include more than one style sheet. That's a problem, right? Potentially. I mean, when you can include conflicting rules, there must be a rule that decides which rule is the one that is applied. If one says color blue and the other says color red, I need to decide between the blue and red. So that's the basic rule that is used by CSS. So the higher the row, the higher the priority. So at the bottom, there's the browser default style. If there is no rule, the browser has a default style, show something. And we saw, the ugly page. That's basically the default. Then there is the external style, which is what we used just before. So that's a separate file which is loaded with the rules. That's the external style, in the sense it's an external file. We can even have internal style, usually in the HTML head section. You can write CSS in this section, which is not shown. It's not content, it's just for metadata, including styles. Or you can have inline style, that is the one with inside the HTML tag, the style attribute. Okay? I think there are examples here, right? This is the one that is also the preferred style for us. I mean, HTML file is born with the idea that the content is in one file and the style is in another. We don't want to put the style again inside the HTML document, right? So that's what we did before. Okay? And you have, of course, a way to load the CSS, so the style, inside the document. That is the one shown here. Okay? It's just a special tag, a link, etc. Okay? Style can also be put inside the header, but we don't like it because it defeats the purpose of having the external style, right? So you have one single style and it applies to the whole website, right? But sometimes it can be useful, especially for experiment. And finally, you can have inline style, that is this style attribute, and now we know what to write here, right? Here you write the CSS rule. The difference is that you don't have the curly bracket and you don't have the selector, because this one applies only to the tag where the attribute is put. Okay, quite intuitive, right? Just really useful for very local changes and typically debugging or stuff like that. Okay. Okay. CSS has a lot of rules and I would say also a lot of priority rules. You can mark rules more important and it changes the way in which they are processed in terms of priority, but I mean, we don't really care that much, okay? So that's really big documents, and there's also a link if you are curious about the priority of the rules and all this stuff. But really, I mean, we are not here to learn all this stuff. We are just here to use something which is reasonably and can make us productive in designing websites, okay? Okay, so there are rules. We know how to write rules. We know how to import rules in our HTML document. We saw a number of properties that basically affect the appearance of the single elements. And now we are going to see the rules that are going to decide where to put elements into the page. So the layout. Okay, and before talking about layout, we need to talk about how the CSS models each element. Okay, the so-called box model. Each element for the CSS is a box. Okay, a box that has a content, can be the text, can be table, can be any tag that appears in some place. And this content has a padding, so a space around, where you can define properties like the color, like the size, and so on. Then it has a border. Again, you can decide the color, size, and so on. And outside that, it still has another thing that is the margin. Okay, so every element has these three boxes outside: padding, border, and margin. By default, typically they are 0 size and no color, transparent color, and so basically it's like they are not there. But actually they are there. If you change the properties, they will appear in the browser window. Okay. You just need a selector to identify the elements, and then a property that will specify the padding or the border and so on, and you can make them appear. So the box model basically says that the size of the element is the width of the element plus the padding, the border, and the margin, etc. Okay? And you see this image. This image is also, again, here somewhere. You see the image? That's why we discuss this in the slides. Because, again, you can decide and you can debug what's happening, because the browser shows you the box model for each element you touch. Okay? You see, if I touch another element, it gives me the properties for that element. So there's no border, right? Let me do something like this. You can play with this stuff. 10, right? I wrote 10. Okay, you see, I mean, you can make them appear depending on what you do. I mean, I'm just playing here because it's easier. Otherwise, you need to search for the property, the CSS property, and you know, specify the size, etc. Okay. Good. Okay, now that we know that each element has a box, including the bigger elements, the tables, the elements that we define ourselves, the divs, the spans, and so on. Now we can locate these boxes around in the page. Okay? So that this box model, each box can be displayed into two different modalities: the inline, left to right, wraps at the end, or box block one after the other on a new line. And then we use properties to decide where to put these box models around. Okay. Actually, over time, CSS has, let's say, created and made available different layouting methods. So first of all, there were the floats. Then they introduced the grid. They introduced the flex. And this is mine. I mean, actually, at a certain point, it became so complex that people started to, you know, create, I mean, expert people in CSS started to create some default set of rules that they put them all together, and basically they create a CSS framework where basically you have a set of really good default rules that applies to more or less every object in the HTML page. And if you know how it works, they have simple syntaxes to change the appearance and the position of the elements in the page. Okay? So, let's go on. I mean, these slides, again, are mostly for reference. This one is important, and the rest is for reference. This one tells you that you can define the position of elements in CSS in 4 different ways. You might wonder why, for instance, sometimes there is something on the page that doesn't move, even if you scroll and so on, right? Typically the advertisement, okay? And actually, they use this positioning. I mean, they just make a rule, a CSS rule. They say the position is fixed according to some reference point. The viewport means the browser window. Okay? So it always stays on the top, at the bottom, or someplace. Okay? And you can even play with these positions dynamically then via the JavaScript language and so on. And the other ways are static as a default way, relative, okay, relative to the block position in the normal flow. So it would have been there, I move it a little bit. Or absolute, it depends on the containing block. So it depends on the HTML structure. It's quite difficult to use these systems, okay? So indeed, we are not going to use them. But I would like to let you know that there are these positioning schemes that basically libraries and framework developers know very well, and they play with these properties to achieve the appearance that you desire. Okay. There is also another thing to care. What happens in case two elements overlap? So one is in front or behind the other. I mean, actually, you don't know. I mean, the page is flat, right? So you need to define the depth of the elements to decide which is shown before the other, in front of the other. Okay? And that's the Z index. Okay? And that's more or less, to give you a flavor of the really basic properties that can be used to move elements around in the page. Okay? And then CSS allows you to use the floats. These are just here for completeness. Difficult to use, not recommended, nor for labs, nor for the exams. Okay? For the exam. I mean, you would like to use them, they are free, but I mean, you spend a lot of time on CSS and it's not valued at the exam. Okay? We don't expect you to write CSS for the exam, except if, let's say, we ask for something. I mean, this has to be orange, but light orange. Okay, it's not, the color is not present in the library or in the framework. Okay, you write a single rule, I mean, with the color, and that's okay. Okay, but I mean, layout is difficult. You typically, we don't expect you typically write CSS for layouting, so for positioning elements in the page. So these slides, basically, we skip them. Okay, I just give you a rough idea. I mean, basically, it's like you have blocks and they float around in the page, okay? Like if they are on the water. And you specify they should go left, right, and so on, and the browser finds an arrangement that fits the rules, okay? Don't care. There are references if you are curious and so on, but I mean, really, it's really difficult to position stuff in this way. And then, since it was so difficult, people designing CSS came out with another idea, that is grid. Okay, again, we don't care about the grid, but the idea, is pretty simple. Since floating things around is difficult because you never know where they end up, because it depends what are the elements surrounding each one. Basically, they say, well, we define a page, we divide the page into a grid. Okay, and just specify in which grid the element should stay. Much easier to work with a grid rather than elements that float around. And this works, but you need to have the display grid and basically for the whole page. So again, it's not that convenient sometimes. Okay. In short, you say for each element where they should fit. Okay. Row 2, column 1, etc. Okay, stuff like that. But you need to pre-divide your page into rows and columns and stuff like that. Good, but not enough for us. Again, references if you're curious. And this is what is suggested for lab and exams only in case the CSS framework, that is the last thing we are going to see pretty quickly, doesn't work. Okay? Flexbox basically says there is an element that is a box inside this box, the positioning is handled by the flex rules. Okay, so the direct children of flex container is an item, and we can decide how to arrange these children. Okay, so we can decide the alignment, left, right, direction, top, bottom, no, horizontally, vertically, the order, the size, etc. Okay, with pretty intuitive rules. Okay, justify content. Okay, leave them at the center, left, right, and stuff like that. Wrapping, no wrapping. Justify direction, row, column. Equal or unequal. I want to have something which is double the size of the others, and stuff like that. Okay. Okay, I can group stuff, but I mean, not that important. So basically, with these pretty intuitive properties, you are able to manage the arrangement of elements inside a flex box. Okay, just define that box as a flex container, so display flex in pure CSS, and you can use these properties for the children. Okay, and it should be pretty easy to use. And you see that flex box, I mean, there's no flex boxes here, so otherwise they appear here again. Okay. Let me go on. You know that nowadays we are going to see the web application on different devices, right? I mean, you have mobile phones, I have a mobile phone, and so on. You access the Politecnico website and all the websites on different screen sizes, different orientation. I mean, the laptop is horizontal, and the mobile phone and the smartphone is typically vertical, and so on. So the content should, in some ways, adapt to the screen size, right? And the screen orientation. This is the so-called responsive design. And if we design the rules, CSS rules for positioning in a good way, we can somehow adapt to these conditions. Sometimes, I mean, there's not enough space, so something will be hidden, and I mean, we cannot really do nothing about that. I mean, the screen of the mobile phone is small, okay? But, you know, sometimes we just need to adapt a little bit, shrink or enlarge things a little bit. This is, let's say, the modern way of designing layouts. And of course, it's difficult. I mean, they invented rules, particular rules like media queries to query, you know, if the size is that, you apply this rule, otherwise not, and so on, you know, stuff like that. Again, I mean, this is just for knowledge. What I would like to point out is that, luckily for us, at a certain point, a few years ago, I would say, maybe 10 or something like this, even more, somebody has studied CSS, has learned all these rules, and including the media queries for, you know, the size of the screens and all the properties, etc., and came out with some set of rules that we call frameworks. Okay, we don't want to call them libraries, maybe, because we expect library to be code. I mean, these are just set of rules. And this is an example of one of them, which is very much used nowadays, quite widespread. That is called Bootstrap. That was originally developed by the guys from Twitter that even changed the name after a certain time, right? So, and that's the one we propose to use in this course. You are not, I mean, it's not mandatory to use the Bootstrap. If you already know another framework, it's fine, but you are on your own, as usual, okay? So, I mean, we can help you with Bootstrap because we learned a little bit of how it works, and so we are more efficient in helping you. It's open source, it's good, okay? It includes CSS rules, of course, and some JavaScript, because sometimes you cannot really code all behaviors just with CSS rules, okay? Allows applying modern styles. I mean, it's reasonably nice for modern times. take care of cross-browser issues. This is something we didn't mention before. The standard is the standard, but sometimes browsers have very subtle differences implementing some functionalities, and the same CSS rule, I mean, the basic ones are fine. I mean, the color is always red, but I mean, in positioning and pixels, margins and stuff might differ a little bit between the browsers. These frameworks take care of make everything uniform for you, okay? And especially, they provide you a simplified layout model. It was so difficult, the floats, the grid, the flex, and so on, right? So, well, how do you use it? Well, Bootstrap basically works with the classes. It's a set of CSS rules, dot something. You just need to learn the names of these classes. And of course, they have been constructed with some logic, so they are easy to learn and to use. And in your code, you just, HTML code, you need to use class equal to something to use these defaults from the library, okay? Or the framework, actually. So, the nomenclature for the class is basically, there's a basic name that is the common style. It's a button, it's of course a list, a table, and stuff. And then additional styles, type of primary button, secondary button, it's a warning, it's a danger, it's a success, whatever, okay? You will learn them. I mean, it's easy, the documentation is online. The library handles everything, layout, content, form, etc. How do we use it? We use it by importing it, as we did the other with the style CSS or link, etc. If we want the advanced functionality, we need to import the JavaScript as well. That has to be done at the end of the body for the moment. And I mean, one of the important things is you are from the course of study of cybersecurity, is that, okay, we can download the library and serve it from our web server. That's fine. Good solution. Perfect also for the exam in case you need it. But I mean, for the exam, we have other things. Or we can load them from CDNs. I hope you know what a CDN is. Content Delivery Network. Okay. So basically, it's a web server around in the internet where people provide some content that is widely used around, okay? Just to serve it more quickly, or to not waste your bandwidth on the server if you have a lot of clients connecting and so on. But just be careful, because as anything that you load from external sources, you don't control them, okay? So when you load something externally from some external sources, here you see the host where you're loading this Bootstrap means CSS, or this set of CSS rules. You need to make sure that what you load is what you expect. And luckily, there's a way in the browser to do this. That is checking the hash of the content you downloaded. Okay? These are all the instructions on how to do this check. I mean, that's the same issue that we had for the JavaScript packages. I mean, either you read the code, or you have somebody else that read the code, in this case the CSS rules, and once you are sure of what they are doing, you get the hash, you save the hash, and you always use that version, that hash, and so on. Okay? And here the principle is the same. Okay? In our course, of course, we are limited, so let's say the first time we download them, we hope it's fine. We compute the hash, we put the hash in the HTML, and that's okay. Okay? Not that we need to put this cross-origin anonymous. That's a long story. We will talk about this later when we talk about course. Otherwise, the check is not performed. Okay? It seems counterintuitive, but something is, because of history of the browsers. So, coming back to Bootstrap, quickly finishing, is Bootstrap is a grid-based system. So after what you saw before, floats, grids, flags, etc., they decided to give you a default layouting system based on 12 columns. Okay, not rows. I mean, rows are decided depending on what you put in the page, but they have 12 columns. The difficult part in CSS is often how to make things align horizontally, because vertically it's easier, right? You have one thing, another one, and then the page finishes. While the horizontal part depends on the window size. It's not up to the content. I mean, the browser doesn't resize, right? From the according to the HTML. And so they decided to use 12 columns, because 12 can be easily divided in 2, 3, 4, 6 parts equally. And it's applied to all elements with class container. And then basically you create a big div that is basically just after the body. And you have this 12 column system. And then you can specify rows and columns, and when you have the necessity to use a lower number of columns, you have these classes, call 6, call 2, call 3, call 5, etc. And you only use that amount of columns. And Bootstrap does everything for you. Okay? It's easier to use than to explain. And there are a lot of sensible defaults and names for classes to apply also other important properties like spacing, property name, size, size, and so on, like m margin x1, mx-1 means use 0.25 rem, and here you know now why we talked about rem. Okay, that's the amount of space. But in practice, I mean, you try. If you don't like, you increase. Otherwise, you decrease. Okay. And there are other, reasonable defaults for most of the important elements in HTML. Okay. And there are also ready-to-use components, quite complex components to be used in Bootstrap. Okay. Finally, you can even use the flex layouting mechanism if you don't like the column system. Sometimes you don't want to be, let's say, stuck to the 12 column system. And that's why we talked about flex. But I invite you not to use it too much. I mean, start with the Bootstrap way, with the 12 columns. And if something doesn't really work, okay, you can explore the flex. And basically, you apply this dflex class, and that element becomes a flex container, and inside you can start with the properties justify content, which are not properties now anymore, but they are classes because Bootstrap takes them with itself, and basically it defines the properties for you in the CSS rules. And so for you, they become classes. Just let me, there are icons, but that's a minor thing. I would like to show you just page 3. I think it's with the Bootstrap, I think. Copy. Paste. Yeah. Open the folder. You see, that's a really basic stuff, right? Hello world, right? I mean, not really bad, nothing special, but you see that it's not like we have the default browser style. You see what happens in case I remove the style, right? I just remove the style directly in the browser. That's the ugly stuff, right? It also has a nice default for text and so on. I think I'm not sure if the 3 has the 3 has the Bootstrap inside. I don't remember. Maybe yes. Yes, it has the Bootstrap inside. Okay. You see that, I didn't write a single line of CSS. Okay? I know I explained for 1 hour CSS and I didn't write a single line, but I mean, that's the powerfulness of the framework, okay? And if I want to have something, you know, light orange, I mean, I need to write the rule, the CSS rule. So, I mean, there's no other option, okay? But, I mean, for default stuff, that's fine. You see the buttons. I didn't write a single line of CSS for the buttons, but they look nice, right? They are even rounded and so on. You see the table is formatted nicely and so on. I mean, nothing really special. I mean, I just did, well, of course, I loaded Bootstrap, container fluid, or container, it doesn't really change that much. I mean, it depends if we want to adapt it or not. Row, call 9, call 3, and stuff like that. That makes the layout. That's all. Okay? So, try to use it as much as possible. I know it's counterintuitive, but for the exam, I mean, just rely on Bootstrap. We don't really care that much about the graphics. And you spend a lot of time on graphics, we cannot count it in the final grade, the mark, etc. Okay? We care about the API, the checks, the security checks, the HTTP methods, the components, React components, etc. Of course, the application must be usable. I mean, we require a button, somewhere a button should be present. Fine. But, I mean, just use the default Bootstrap. I mean, we don't care if it's green, red, or blue, unless, I mean, we asked for colors. But, I mean, we really don't care about these things. Just use these defaults, which are fine for us. Okay? Really, last thing, because I know that when you go in the lab, you like nice things, and I like nice things as well. I mean, there is also a library for icons. I mean, it's just not just Bootstrap specific. I mean, again, it's something that you can define. Say, in some ways, it's not really HTML, but I mean, it's like having new characters that you can use, and you use them like with the I and class with the name. Okay? Oh, I forgot to put a link to the. Well, you just search Bootstrap icons, right? Bootstrap icons. I mean, so just in case you know, you need icons like this. So try to experiment with these things, and it's good to learn to write, let's say, a simple CSS rule, because at a certain point you might need to write a very simple CSS rule using an ID or a class. Typically, you typically don't use the element selector because it's quite too generic probably. And the rest, I mean, for the rest, try to use Bootstrap for styling. Okay. I think it's a good investment for the future as well. A lot of things are styled in Bootstrap nowadays. If you go to a lot of websites, even government websites and stuff, you recognize the style. Okay, so it's worth having a look and try to use it. So I think that's all for today. If you have any questions, otherwise remember the schedule. So tomorrow there's the lab, and Friday still there's a lab. I've lost the schedule. Yeah. And next week, as it's written on the schedule, Monday there will be lab. Okay? Remember that. And in the meanwhile, I will keep you updated about the move of the lab from Friday to Tuesday. They didn't confirm nothing, so tomorrow still just one group, sorry. Okay, no questions. So that's all for today. Thank you for your attention, and